It's Friday, December 12th. I'm Jake Ward. This is The Rip Current. We look at the big invisible forces that are pushing us around every day. And on Thursday, December 11th, yesterday, President Trump finally came through with an executive order that he'd been hinting at for quite a while, but that neither the states nor voters want. And that is a blanket prohibition on state law when it comes to AI. These state legislatures have been passing laws. All 50 states plus Puerto Rico have passed some sort of AI regulation recently. And 1,000 or so bills have been considered or are still under consideration. And those have run the gamut. There is a New York state bill that tries to regulate the use of AI as a sort of companion, especially for young people. There is a Colorado bill that forbids algorithmic discrimination when it comes to something like hiring. And in Illinois, they have banned the use of AI as a therapy bot, as a prosthetic version of a human therapist. That has created, the companies argue, a patchwork of laws that make it very difficult for a company to be in compliance. In the Section 1 of this executive order that President Trump finally published, entitled Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence, he basically says, and I'm quoting here, that we must update existing federal regulatory frameworks to remove barriers to and encourage adoption of AI applications across sectors. It also says we remain in the earliest days of this technological revolution and are in a race with adversaries for supremacy within it. To win, United States AI companies must be free to innovate without cumbersome regulation. But excessive state regulation, it reads, thwarts this imperative. This patchwork, and it is a patchwork of state regulations, has created, of course, a long checklist for anyone seeking to create an all-in-one AI product that can be used by any American in any state. You could, of course, argue, however, that federal law could in the future create that same long checklist. The thing is, there is no federal law around AI right now. Literally nothing. There isn't any rules around data privacy in this country. There's no rules around data transparency. We literally have nothing regulating both the fuel source, that is the training data, the social media data that we've been giving over all of this time. Nothing regulates that, and nothing regulates what these companies wind up doing with the models that they use that data to train. So in the place of that, that's why states have been moving so fast. They, it's famously said, are the laboratory of democracy, and they have been hard at work. So now, this executive order puts in place basically 5 mechanisms that include determining which state laws are in violation of, are excessively burdensome, basically. It creates an AI litigation task force in which the Attorney General has to essentially go and start suing these states that have put a burden on this stuff. It gets to withhold funding for digital infrastructure to states that are held to be in violation of this executive order. And that is a big deal for, let's say, a state with a lot of rural counties who depend on that federal money in order to stay connected and be part of the digital economy. And creates a push, in theory, for legislation at the federal level when it comes to AI. And that would fall to both the Assistant to the President for Science and Technology and the Special Advisor for AI and Crypto, a guy named David Sachs. They would be the ones creating a legislative recommendation that would establish a uniform federal policy framework for AI that preempts state law. It's important to know the context, of course, that the folks interested in this and the folks that are pushing for it and seem to have gotten their way are not the voters. Recent studies of American voters have found that in every category of adult voter on both sides of the aisle, the vast majority of them are in favor of regulation and don't care if that regulation slows the industry down. this question of supremacy and our adversaries and trying to beat China, they don't care about that. It is the companies, of course, that care most about that stuff. And their argument is, and they're not wrong about this, that China doesn't require their companies to abide by a patchwork of laws on a state-by-state level. They only have a single federal set of regulations that they have to abide by. The contrary point to that, however, is that that is a long checklist at the federal level when it comes to AI in China. The regulations there require that the AI be trained on data that they can show, that is transparent. You have to be able to show the AI's work. In part, you have to be able to do that to make sure that it is in keeping with the teachings of Communist Party doctrine. Also, you are held personally liable as the CEO of an AI company if your product is misused in some way. So the burden on companies there is very high. It's not exactly a light set of regulations when it comes to this stuff, but it's a single set of regulations at the federal level. So what pro-competition, pro-industry advocates have argued is that this will also entrench the patchwork of state laws entrenches the advantages of big companies that have the legal and policy resources to figure out and abide by all 50 states' rules. Whereas a small startup doesn't have the resources to do that and might be kept out of the market. That's one argument that people make. But again, in a world of increasingly automated research tools, it's not that hard to come up with a single checklist that would get you would allow you to check the boxes in all 50 states. So this idea, and it's always a weird one to me, when highly technical, really, really sophisticated companies say that something is sort of too complicated for them to figure out, I always just think, aren't you the AI company? Aren't you employing some of the smartest people in the world? Like, look, what's your market cap again? So that argument has always been funny to me. But there's a great analysis of this executive order by Duke University's Nita Farahani, who teaches law there, and she has an AI and the law class, and she wrote it up at her Substack, which is called Thinking Freely with Nita Farahani. And she asks this question that there's basically like sort of three competing principles under this executive order. One is, should states be allowed to continue to be the laboratory of democracy? Experimentation is how we figure out what laws work and what don't. And the tension there is in then where companies operating nationally face really, complex compliance problems. Big tension. The other one is the democratic process versus executive urgency. Do we have time to sort this stuff out on a case-by-case, courtroom-by-courtroom basis, or do we need the executive to jump in? I would argue that the tension is almost in a way the reverse, in that these states seem to feel tremendous urgency to get something on the books because there's nobody regulating at the federal level. So the urgency kind of cuts both ways, but that's certainly a big one. And then the last one is this question of innovation versus safety, which is at the heart of all of this stuff. Should these companies be allowed to experiment in the wild? Should they be allowed to run tests on all of us and figure out what is going wrong after the fact? Or should they have to come up with, obey a safety principle very, very early? And this executive order seems to be very much on the side of go ahead and experiment on everybody and we'll figure it out later. So right now, a bunch of state legislative sessions are underway. And you can imagine that the legislatures are undoubtedly hearing about this executive order and thinking to themselves, man, what a pain. I don't want to have to deal with that when this AI law that I've been championing suddenly is in conflict with national law. And so it could have a chilling effect, as the constitutional scholars put it, on the activism of these folks. And so there's a real question of trade-offs here. I have no doubt, however, that the attorneys general of these states are absolutely writing some form of the same letter to federal authorities at the moment. And it's something like, see you in court. Because what's undoubtedly going to have to be sorted out because of this executive order is this question of whether the president is allowed to simply say, hey, states, you don't get to regulate this vitally important piece of our national GDP. in your borders, you have to let us do it, even though we've shown no indication that we're going to so far. And again, I would just point out, all of this is just abstract because the voters don't care about this. They have said, in fact, they feel the opposite about it. And so it is interesting to me that this wound up being an executive order as opposed to something that people had talked about, which was maybe attaching this to the National Defense Authorization Act. But perhaps the legislators at the federal level said, we don't want to carry this because we know our voters don't like it. So for some reason, this wound up in the form of an executive order. And that, of course, is going to mean that it's undoubtedly, in spite of it being an executive order, it is undoubtedly going to be an issue sorted out in the courts before long.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.